Welcome to the History Maps podcast. The year is 2200 BCE. The climate of the Eurasian steppe is shifting rapidly, becoming increasingly arid. A pastoralist group, feeling the pressure of this drying environment, congregates near the marshy floodplains of the Southern Ural rivers.
Right.
And here, they do not just pitch tents. They construct massive, permanent timber and earth walls reaching 6 meters high, surrounded by deep moats. So in this deep dive into the sources, we examine the Sintashta culture.
A highly structured, fortified, and, well, militarized society.
Exactly, one that emerged in the Southern Urals between 2200 and 1800 BCE. We will use extensive archaeological, genetic, and linguistic sources to explore how this society mastered bronze metallurgy, pioneered the spoked-wheel chariot, and established the linguistic and cultural foundations of the Proto-Indo-Iranian people.
There's a lot to unpack there.
There is. So, to start, we have a group of pastoralists who have spent generations roaming the open steppes, and suddenly they stop. They decide to build imposing stationary fortresses. I mean, why?
Well, that decision to stop moving is a monumental shift in human behavior for this specific region. If we want to understand why they did it, we have to look closely at the environmental pressures documented in the historical and geological records.
Okay, so a climate issue.
Yeah, the Sintashta culture was essentially forged by a severe, prolonged environmental crisis. Around 2500 BCE, a cooling and drying climatic shift began across the Eurasian steppes.
So it was getting colder and drier.
Right, but this aridification process was not a sudden catastrophe that happened overnight. It was a steady, intergenerational worsening of conditions that eventually peaked around 2000 BCE.
When you say aridification process, what does that actually look like on the ground for someone living there? I mean, are we talking about a desert forming?
Not quite a complete sandy desert, but a drastic reduction in rainfall and surface water. It turns lush grasslands into dry, brittle, unproductive environments.
Which is bad news if you relied on grass.
It is terrible news. For the pastoralists living in this region, at the time, specifically the earlier Poltavka and Abashevo cultures, this meant their traditional open steppe way of life was becoming completely unsustainable.
Because they need to feed their herds.
Exactly. Pastoralists rely on large herds of grazing animals. Cattle, sheep, goats, and horses. Those animals need immense amounts of grass and water every single day.
Right.
So as the open steppe dried up, the vast grazing lands vanished. They were basically forced to abandon their open steppe roaming and retreat toward the only places that still held water.
The rivers.
Yes, the river valleys, specifically the Ural and Tobol basins. In these lower elevations, the remaining marshes and floodplains provided the only reliable sustenance left for their herds.
Okay, let me pause you there. If you are a nomadic herder and the grass in your area dries up, the standard historical solution is to pack up your tents and walk somewhere else.
Sure, usually.
You just move until you find green grass. Why did these specific people decide to stay put and build fortresses instead? It feels a bit like a game of musical chairs, where instead of looking for another chair when the music stops, the players decide to build a wall around the chair they currently have and, dare anyone else to try and take it.
That musical chairs analogy perfectly captures the territoriality that emerges when essential resources become hyper-localized. Moving simply was no longer a viable survival strategy.
Because the drought was everywhere.
Yes, the drought was widespread. There was no somewhere else with green grass nearby. The surrounding steppe could no longer support a migration, which made these specific river valleys absolute lifelines.
So you stay or you die.
Pretty much. If you leave the river valley, your herd dies. If your herd dies, you die.
So everyone in the region is being squeezed into the exact same geographical bottleneck.
Yeah.
You mentioned two distinct precursor cultures earlier, the Poltavka and the Abashevo. I want to understand who these people were before they became the Sintashta.
Yeah.
How did these two distinct groups end up merging?
Well, it is a textbook case of cultural fusion driven by sheer necessity. The sources outline that the Poltavka culture had been occupying the Ural-Tobol steppe region since about 2800 BCE.
So they were the locals.
Right, they were the established local cattle herders. They possessed the foundational pastoral economy and deeply held traditions, such as burying their dead in kurgans.
Which are the large mounded earthen tombs.
Exactly, and then you have the Abashevo.
Where do they fit in?
The Abashevo were migrants. They descended from the forest steppe, corded-ware cultures located further west, specifically the Fatyanovo-Balanovo groups, and they had moved eastward into the Ural region.
Okay, so locals and migrants meeting up.
Right, but the critical element the Abashevo brought to the table was advanced metallurgical expertise. They were heavily experienced in working with copper and producing arsenical bronze.
Oh, okay.
So you have local steppe herders who know the terrain and possess the livestock, colliding with forest steppe migrants who know how to extract and manipulate metal.
And the climate forces them together.
Yes, the harsh climate acted as a pressure cooker. It forced these highly mobile, distinct groups into the exact same localized, defensible spaces. Out of that tense integration, a completely new society emerged.
It makes a lot of sense. You combine a deep knowledge of livestock with advanced industrial technology, and you get something entirely new. You get a culture that decides to permanently settle and fortify specific riverbank locations.
Precisely.
But I want to really dig into the physical architecture of these settlements because the sources describe a scale of construction that is difficult to wrap your head around for the time period.
The scale is indeed vast. Archaeologists have identified between 23 and 25 of these fortified settlements.
That is a lot of fortresses.
It is. They form a network often referred to as the country of towns. This network covers an area of roughly 400 by 200 kilometers, located predominantly in modern-day Chelyabinsk Oblast, Russia, and northern Kazakhstan.
Right.
We are looking at key sites like Sintashta, Kameny Umbar, and Arkim.
Let us use Arkim as an example because the numbers associated with it are just massive. The site spans 20,000 square meters and is estimated to have housed between 1,500 and 2,500 people.
Yes.
If you were standing on the steppe in 2000 BCE approaching Arkim, what exactly are you looking at?
You would be looking at an imposing, highly engineered fortress. The structural layouts of these settlements were distinctly circular, oval, or sometimes rectangular, designed explicitly for maximum defensive efficiency.
Like a giant wooden ring.
Basically, the outer walls were formidable barriers. They measured 4 to 5 meters thick at the base and reached up to 6 meters high.
6 meters is essentially a 2-story modern building. How do a group of former pastoralists construct something that massive without modern machinery?
They utilized a highly labor-intensive, complex timber frame system. The builders would construct 2 parallel wooden walls using heavy timber logs.
Okay.
Then they would fill the large gap between these 2 wooden walls with compacted earth and rock.
But where are they getting all that earth and rock on a flat floodplain? I mean, you can't just scrape that much dirt off the surface.
No, you get it from the defensive moats. Outside the massive walls, they dug deep, V-shaped drainage moats that surrounded the entire settlement.
Oh, that is clever.
It was. These moats measured between 2 to 4 meters wide and about 1.5 meters deep. Every basket of dirt and stone pulled from that moat was hauled up and packed into the timber frames to create the wall.
Very fair.
It was an incredibly efficient use of material, but it required immense coordinated community labor.
That level of organization implies a strong central authority, or at least a deeply ingrained communal agreement on survival.
Absolutely.
And the interior layout seems just as rigidly organized. We are not talking about a random assortment of tents inside a wall. The houses were substantial, measuring between 100 and 250 square meters each.
Correct. The domestic spaces were highly formalized, but the most crucial detail is that these were not freestanding structures.
Right, they were connected.
Yes, they shared common sidewalls and were arranged radially. If you look at an aerial blueprint of Arkim, the houses look like the spokes of a wheel extending from a central open plaza outward to the defensive perimeter.
The sources mention a specific construction detail that I found fascinating. To save on overall labor and material, each family was responsible for building the section of the outer defensive wall that was attached directly to the back of their specific house.
Yes, that is a defining feature of the Sintashta architectural model. They integrated domestic space directly with military defense.
It is basically a prehistoric ring of townhouses, where the back wall of your living room is also the primary military defense line for the entire city.
That is a good way to picture it.
That has massive psychological implications.
Yeah.
You're literally living inside the fortification. If the wall breaches, your specific family dies first. That ensures that every single family has a literal immediate stake in maintaining the community's defense.
It creates an inescapable communal bond. You can't just ignore a weak spot in the wall if it's in your own kitchen. Furthermore, these settlements required complex civil engineering.
In what way?
Because they were built near marshy floodplains to sustain the herds, they faced serious water management issues. The settlements featured sophisticated internal water drainage systems and storm drains to prevent the central plazas and homes from flooding during seasonal rains or snowmelts.
Okay, so we have a heavily fortified, highly organized ring of houses. But it is what archaeologists found inside these living rooms that really shifts our understanding of who these people were.
Right, the interior features.
Yeah, we are transitioning from civil engineering into heavy industry and surprisingly into theology.
This is where the daily life of the Sintashta becomes incredibly complex. Inside almost every single excavated house within these settlements, archaeologists uncovered a very specific pairing of features.
Which was?
A cupola-shaped smelting furnace built directly adjacent to a water well.
From a purely practical metallurgical standpoint, having a furnace next to a well makes sense, right? If you are smelting copper, you need water to wash the raw ores and to cool the hot metal.
Yes, you do.
Also, I read that digging a deep well shaft right next to the furnace might have provided a natural draft of air, which helps the furnace reach the extremely high temperatures necessary to melt rock.
The practical applications are undeniable. Smelting copper requires temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees Celsius, which necessitates constant forced airflow, usually via bellows.
So a draft from a well would help.
It could indeed aid in ventilation. But if we only look at the practical mechanics, we miss the profound cultural context. This setup is not just an industrial workstation. It is deeply connected to some of the oldest religious texts in the human record.
This is where we bring in the linguistic sources. How do we connect a physical furnace in the Ural Mountains to ancient texts?
Through the field of comparative philology, scholars widely identify the Sintashta culture as the material archaeological manifestation of the Proto-Indo-Iranian speakers.
The ancestors of later groups.
Exactly. These are the ancestors of the people who would later compose the Rig Veda in ancient India and the Avesta in ancient Iran. To understand the worldview of the Sintashta, researchers examine the religious concepts preserved in those later texts.
And what specific concept from those texts links back to a furnace and a well?
There is an enigmatic deity mentioned in both the Vedic and Avestan traditions named Apam Napat. Translated literally, the name means the grandson of the waters.
Grandson of the waters.
Yes. Apam Napat represents a highly specific, somewhat paradoxical concept. He is the god of fire who resides deep within the water.
Fire and water. That sounds like a riddle. How did earlier scholars interpret that before they found these Sintashta houses?
Well, for decades, it was a major point of debate. Philologists proposed numerous naturalistic explanations.
Like what?
Some thought it described the sun sinking into the ocean at dusk. Others argued it represented lightning flashing within dark rain clouds.
That makes sense logically.
It did, but when archaeologists fully excavated the Sintashta settlements and found domestic furnaces built directly into the side of deep water wells in almost every single home, a physical explanation emerged.
Right in front of them.
Yes. The domestic furnace well system provides a tangible architectural manifestation of this exact mythology.
So you were saying they were literally building the mythology into their living spaces.
Yeah.
How does that translate into daily religious practice? Does an industrial metalworker view themselves as a priest?
In a sense, yes. The boundaries between industry and religion were porous, if they existed at all. In the broader Indo-Iranian religious tradition, there is a core belief that domestic fire is inherently purifying.
Okay.
And that it provides clean, sacred water. By placing the intense, roaring fire of the metallurgical furnace immediately beside the deep, dark water of the well, the Sintashta were physically constructing the domain of a Pumnapat right in their living rooms.
That completely changes how we view their daily labor. It is not just a 9-to-5 factory job. It is a cosmological act.
Precisely. The rituals described in the ancient texts detail daily practices, such as pouring sacred offerings, specifically clarified butter, or ghee, directly into the domestic fire.
Why ghee?
This was done to symbolically reenact the rising of the sun and to assist the solar deity through the darkness of night. Given the architecture, the burning liquid ghee from the furnace would inevitably drip or reach the water in the adjacent well.
Connecting the two elements.
Right. This action physically bridges the gap between their daily, heavy industrial labor of smelting metal and their grand cosmological beliefs. The act of making metal was deeply intertwined with maintaining the balance of the universe.
The practical output of all this sacred labor was a staggering amount of metal. These settlements were not just well-defended villages for hiding cows, they were fortified industrial centers.
Yes, industrial is the right word.
And the type of metal they were producing is critical. They were processing high arsenic copper ores to produce arsenical bronze.
The metallurgy is quite specific. Pure copper is relatively soft, making it poor for holding a sharp edge or withstanding heavy impact.
Not great for weapons.
Exactly. By alloying copper with arsenic, specifically aiming for a composition containing 2 to 5% arsenic, you produce arsenical bronze. This alloy is significantly harder than pure copper, and it casts much better.
Making it ideal for creating durable, edged weapons and tools.
Right.
But wait, arsenic is highly toxic. If you are heating arsenic-rich rock in a furnace inside your house, the fumes must be incredibly dangerous.
It was an exceptionally hazardous occupation. Smelting arsenical ores releases arsenic trioxide gas.
That sounds lethal.
It can be. Prolonged exposure leads to severe health issues, including nerve damage, respiratory failure, and eventually death.
Inside their own homes.
Yes, the individuals working these indoor furnaces would have undoubtedly suffered the physical consequences of this toxic environment, which further underscores the critical, almost sacrificial importance this society placed on metal production.
To understand the sheer volume of production, the sources detail the mining operations. They were not just picking up loose rocks off the ground.
No, this was an industrial-scale extraction effort. If we examine the Vorovskaya Yama mine, located east of the Ural River, the data is staggering.
What do they find there?
Archaeologists estimate that the Sintashta people manually extracted roughly 6,000 tons of quartzitic rock from this single location.
6,000 tons.
Yeah.
Using bronze tools and bone picks.
Yes. They likely used fire setting, heating the rock face with fires, and then throwing cold water on it to crack the stone before prying the ore out with antler picks and bronze chisels.
That is an immense amount of manual labor.
It is. And the evidence of the processing is everywhere. When excavating the settlements, researchers do not just find a few tools. They uncover massive slag heaps, hundreds of shattered ceramic crucibles, and countless clay nozzles, known as tuyeres.
What are tuyeres used for?
They were attached to the bellows to direct air into the furnaces. Industrial waste is distributed throughout all the domestic spaces.
But if every house is a bronze factory, they're producing way more metal than one settlement could possibly use. Why produce such a massive surplus?
Trade. The steppes of the Southern Urals are rich in copper, but they severely lack another crucial element, which is tin.
And tin is needed for normal bronze.
Right. While arsenical bronze is good, tin bronze is superior. It is harder, less brittle, and far less toxic to produce. Securing access to tin was a primary economic driver across the entire ancient world.
So they had to import it.
Yes. Because tin was virtually non-existent in their local territory, the Sintashta compensated by engaging in massive long-distance continental trade.
And the sources show this trade network expanding incredibly far south. By 2000 BCE, we see tin bronze suddenly becoming common in the cities of the Bactria-Margiana Archaeological Complex, or BMAC.
Which is located in modern-day Turkmenistan and northern Afghanistan.
That is thousands of kilometers away.
It requires an immense logistical network. The archaeological record suggests the Sintashta were exporting their massive surplus of arsenical bronze and raw copper south via pack animals to these advanced BMA cities.
And what did BMA do with it?
In return, BMA, which was a highly urbanized, wealthy civilization, acted as a conduit. They connected the steppe herders to the complex, established empires of the Near East, such as Elam and Mesopotamia.
This represents a massive societal pivot. You have a group of people who, just a few generations prior, were egalitarian pastoral herders, worrying about finding green grass.
Exactly.
Now they are industrial-scale miners, smelting toxic alloys in their living rooms and exporting tons of metal across the continent.
They underwent a rapid economic evolution. Once the environmental pressure forced them to settle and fortify, they capitalized entirely on the copper deposits beneath their feet.
They used what they had.
Yes, their heavily defended settlements sat at the northern terminus of a vital intercontinental trade artery. By refining and exporting massive quantities of metal, these former herders transformed themselves into highly specialized metal oligarchs.
That is a huge upgrade in status.
It is. They exchanged their metal for prestige goods from the south, likely woven textiles, exotic stones, or rare spices, establishing themselves as critical suppliers in a Bronze Age supply chain.
But when you accumulate unprecedented wealth and you store it inside stationary visible walls during a period of intense climate stress and resource competition, You paint a giant target on your back.
Exactly. Wealth attracts raiding. To protect their metallurgical operations, their stored trade goods, and their concentrated herds, the Sintashta needed a way to project power outward across the steppe.
Because walls aren't enough.
Right. Defensive walls keep you safe while you are inside, but you still have to send your herds out to graze, and you still have to protect your trade caravans. They needed a military breakthrough to dominate the surrounding territory.
And that breakthrough arrived around 2000 BCE. We were talking about the invention of the spoked wheel chariot. I want to be very clear about what this vehicle is, because prior to this, if you had a wheeled vehicle on the steppe, it was a heavy, lumbering wagon with solid wooden wheels drawn by oxen.
Very
Right. It was useful for slowly moving a tent or hauling rocks, but utterly useless in a fast-paced fight.
Solid wheels are incredibly heavy and prone to shattering upon hard impacts. What the Sintashta developed was a lightweight, highly maneuverable, two-wheeled vehicle.
The technological leap is in the wheel itself. The sources describe wheels featuring between 8 and 12 carefully crafted wooden spokes.
Yes.
Bending wood to create a rim and fitting tensioned spokes into a central nave requires a level of master carpentry that is entirely different from just cutting a solid circle out of a tree trunk. And importantly, these new vehicles were drawn not by slow oxen, but by horses.
The integration of the horse is just as important as the wheel. These were not just wild horses tied to a cart. They were heavily trained animals controlled by highly advanced, bit-equipped bridles.
How do you know that?
Archaeologists find intricately carved antler and bone cheek pieces in the graves, which were used to apply precise pressure to the horse's mouth. This allowed a driver to steer a team of horses at full gallop with incredible accuracy.
Now, I know there is a massive scholarly debate surrounding this. For a long time, historians did not believe that steppe nomads could have invented the chariot.
The debate was fierce. For many decades, prominent scholars, most notably Mary Lidauer and Juice Crow, argued adamantly against a steppe origin for the chariot.
What was their main argument? Why did they think it was impossible?
They presented two main arguments. First, they claimed that a delicate, spoked wheel chariot would be practically useless in the rough, uneven, often muddy terrain of the open steppe.
They thought it would just break.
Yes, they argued the wheels would break in the high grass. Second, and more importantly, they applied a simple logic. If you have a domesticated horse, riding on its back is infinitely more practical, cheaper, and easier than spending weeks building a complex wooden vehicle to hitch it to.
Okay, that sounds logical on the surface.
Therefore, they concluded, the chariot must have been developed in the urbanized, flat, engineered terrains of the Near East, perhaps Mesopotamia, as a smooth riding vehicle for royal communication and transport.
So they thought the steppe chariots were just copies.
Exactly. According to this old theory, the chariots found in the steppe were merely crude, impractical status symbols built by herders trying to imitate Near Eastern kings.
That sounds like a solid logical argument, until you actually look at the biology of the horses that existed in 2000 BCE. The sources systematically dismantle that theory using zoological data.
Yes, the biological data completely upends the old consensus. The horses available to the Sintashta belong to what geneticists call the Dom 2 lineage.
What exactly is a Dom 2 horse? Are we talking about a massive Clydesdale or a sleek Arabian thoroughbred?
Neither. A Dom 2 lineage horse from the Bronze Age was essentially the size of a modern pony.
A pony.
Yes, they were sturdy and they possessed strong backs perfectly suitable for pulling heavy loads, but they lacked the specific skeletal structure and sheer size required to effectively carry a fully armed adult human male in a combat situation.
So if I am a Sintashta warrior, wearing heavy bronze armor and carrying a shield and weapons, and I try to ride one of these pony-sized Dom 2 horses into a battle,
the animal would rapidly fatigue, its spine might suffer injury, and it would quickly become unmanageable and entirely useless in a fast-paced skirmish.
that changes everything.
It does. The physiological limitations of the Bronze Age horse made effective military cavalry impossible.
The chariot was not a luxury item, and it was not a crude imitation of a southern royal taxi. It was a brutal technological necessity.
Precisely.
If you want to use the speed and power of the horse in warfare, but the horse is too small to carry you, you have to invent a way to let the horse pull you instead.
Exactly. The Sintashta needed to deploy rapid kinetic energy on the battlefield. By inventing the lightweight spoked wheel and attaching two strong but small horses to a highly maneuverable wooden platform, they completely circumvented the horse's biological inability to carry a rider.
To visualize how this actually worked, let's say you are an enemy infantryman facing a Sintashta attack. You are not facing a solitary rider struggling to maintain his balance on an exhausted pony.
No, you are facing a stable, high-speed mobile firing platform. There are two men on the chariot, a dedicated driver focused entirely on steering, and an archer whose hands are completely free.
And that archer is wielding a short, highly powerful composite bow. The archaeological finds show they were firing arrows measuring 50 to 70 centimeters in length, often tipped with bronze or bone.
The tactical advantage is terrifying. This chariot team can rapidly flank an infantry line, unleash a devastating, concentrated volley of arrows from a safe distance, and then quickly retreat out of range before the enemy infantry can even close the distance.
Hit and run.
Exactly. And if things get too dangerous, they just speed back behind the safety of their massive 6-meter-high fortress walls.
This technological leap provided a profound asymmetrical advantage in combat. It revolutionized Bronze Age warfare by introducing unprecedented mobility and ranged firepower. But the impact of the chariot extended far beyond the battlefield. It completely restructured the internal fabric of Sintashta society.
It certainly did.
How so? I mean, does building a weapon change your social class?
It does, when the weapon requires immense specialized resources. Operating a chariot is not something a casual farmer can do on the weekend. You need highly skilled carpenters to steam and bend the wood for the wheels.
You need specialized metal workers.
Right, to forge the bronze fittings and weapons. You need dedicated animal handlers to train the horses to run in tandem amid the chaos of battle. And most importantly, you need individuals who possess the immense free time required to master the arts of high-speed driving and archery.
So it inherently creates a class divide. The people who control the chariots become an elite caste simply because they control the most complex, expensive, and devastating technology in existence.
Precisely. The adoption of the chariot elevated a specific group of warriors to the absolute top of a new, highly stratified social hierarchy. This elite status dictated their power in life, and importantly for archaeologists, it was rigorously and extravagantly maintained in death.
We see this hierarchy crystal clear when we look at their cemeteries. The sources describe the Sintashta society as chiefdom-level and highly stratified, organized heavily around this new military aristocracy. We were talking about the kurgan burials.
The kurgans are large earthen burial mounds built near the fortified settlements. The demographic data extracted from these cemeteries is incredibly revealing.
What does the data show?
According to the mortuary analysis in the sources, elite adult males made up only 2 to 3% of the total population. Yet this tiny fraction of the society completely dominated the burial wealth.
It is a massive concentration of resources. The sources note that up to 54% of adult graves contained weapons. That is a huge increase compared to the cultures that lived there before. We're talking about graves packed with flanged daggers, socketed axes, and heavy bronze spearheads.
It reflects a society that heavily valorized martial prowess, but the most compelling evidence of this extreme stratification is found in the chariot burials themselves.
Let us talk about those specific graves, because the logistics of burying a chariot are fascinating. The sources point to specific excavations, such as Sintashta Mogila graves 11, 12, and 30, as well as Kameni Ambar 5, grave 8. How do you actually put a vehicle into a grave?
It requires careful preparation. When an elite chariot warrior died, a large, deep, rectangular pit was dug. The chariot itself was carefully dismantled to fit into the burial chamber.
They took it apart.
Yes. The lower sections of the spoked wheels were placed into specific slots carved directly into the earthen floor of the grave.
Which is fortunate for modern archaeologists because the wood rots away over 4,000 years. But those wheel slots leave precise imprints in the soil that can be measured today, proving the exact diameter and spoke count of the wheels.
Exactly. The soil preserves the ghost of the machine, but the chariot vehicle was only part of the deposit. The graves also contained the sacrificed animals that made the chariot function, the horses.
How many horses are we talking about?
It varied based on the individual status. Sometimes horses were buried in pairs, representing the specific two-horse team that pulled the chariot in life.
And sometimes more.
Yes, in some of the most elite instances, up to 12 horses were sacrificed and placed in a single grave, positioned carefully around the burial chamber, alongside a vast array of bronze weaponry.
I want to focus on the immense economic cost of doing that. We have established that trained chariot horses and the chariot itself represented the absolute pinnacle of Bronze Age technology and wealth. To slaughter 12 trained horses and bury a fully functional chariot is staggering.
It is a massive sacrifice of capital.
It's like a modern billionaire insisting on being buried with a fleet of custom military vehicles and a private jet. It permanently removes those incredibly valuable assets from the community's use.
That extreme level of conspicuous consumption is a defining hallmark of societies where political power is maintained through prestige, intimidation, and the blatant display of excess wealth.
Showing off to maintain control.
Right. The surviving family is essentially demonstrating that their wealth and power are so vast, so unshakable, that they can afford to literally bury a fortune in the ground without suffering any economic hardship. It cements the lineage's authority over the rest of the population.
So the horses are sacrificed as the ultimate symbols of military power and traction. But the sources reveal that another animal was heavily utilized in these funerary rites, and it symbolized a completely different kind of elite status.
Yes. While the horses get a lot of attention due to the chariot connection, a detailed statistical analysis of 46 Sintashta burials brings another animal into focus.
Dogs.
Dogs, exactly. This study was conducted by researchers Frick, Usmanova, and Kosintsev, and their goal was to understand the specific, nuanced role of dog sacrifices within these cemeteries.
That is interesting. If you value chariots and bronze so much, wouldn't a dog just be viewed as a common, everyday working animal? Why does a dog signify elite status? Let us examine how the researchers broke down the data.
The researchers approached this by categorizing the 46 excavated burials into 3 distinct groups, based on the types of everyday grave goods found within them.
Okay, what was the first group?
The first group was dominated by taluses, which are the ankle bones of various animals, often used in ancient times as gaming pieces or divination tools.
And the second?
The second group was characterized predominantly by the inclusion of various ceramic vessels. And the third group contained what they called multi-component assemblages, which is basically a wide, diverse mix of different domestic and personal artifacts.
Okay, so 3 varied groups of standard burials. Where did the dogs and the wealth come in?
The researchers tracked the placement of what they defined strictly as prestige items. These were items that required immense skill to create or were made of highly valuable materials.
Like what?
These specific prestige items included heavy bronze spearheads, intricately carved bone spatulas, polished stone mace heads, the specialized bronze adzax, also known as a chikam, which is a fearsome armor-piercing weapon, as well as harpoons made of bone and bronze, and heavy stone grinders and pestles.
And what did the analysis show regarding these specific items?
Across all 3 of the diverse burial groups, a striking and entirely consistent pattern emerged. The analysis demonstrated that these high-value prestige items were found exclusively in burials that also included a dog sacrifice.
Exclusively?
Yes, the correlation was absolute. If there was no dog remains in the grave, there were absolutely no prestige items included.
That is a fascinating rule. And the physical placement of these specific dog burials within the larger cemetery was not random either?
Not at all. Burials containing dogs were frequently located in the most prestigious central part of the Kurgan mound, whereas lesser graves without dogs were pushed to the periphery. Furthermore, the dog sacrifices were highly associated with graves that contained pits for wheeled vehicles or chariot parts.
So how does this redefine our understanding of their social classes? Why does burying a dog equal high status?
It tells us that the dog sacrifice was not a generalized, common practice available to everyone. It was strictly reserved for a socially distinct elite group. To understand why, we have to look at the specific artifacts associated with the dogs.
The tools point to specific jobs.
Right. They point to 2 distinct professions: herders and metalworkers.
The grinders and pestles would be used by the metalworkers for crushing and processing hard copper ore, right?
Exactly. And the weapons and bone tools associate with the herders, who managed the massive, vital flocks of sheep and cattle.
Okay, I see the connection now.
For representatives of these 2 critical economic spheres, the dog was not just a pet. A herding dog manages the livestock, and a guard dog protects the settlement from threats. In a society that is literally surrounded by defensive walls, facing severe climate stress and constant threat of raiding, the dog functioned as a potent, living symbol of protection. The dog represented the active defense over the community's 2 most vital resources, their animal herds and their stored metal wealth.
So burying a dog with an individual signaled that this person was a vital protector and manager of the society's lifeblood.
Exactly.
These meticulous burials give us the artifacts, the chariots, the horses, and the dogs. We can reconstruct their daily lives and their social hierarchies from these physical objects. But modern archaeological science has taken this a massive step further. We do not just have to guess who these people were based on their tools. We have extracted the ancient DNA directly from their skeletal
The
remains.
ancient DNA sequencing provides concrete, undeniable data regarding the deep origins and movements of the Sintashta people.
What exactly did the geneticists find when they sequenced the individuals from sites like Kameni Ambar 5?
They found a very distinct, heavily admixed genetic profile. The Sintashta population's autosomal DNA was composed of roughly 68% steppe ancestry, 24% European early Neolithic ancestry, and about 8% Western Siberian hunter-gatherer ancestry.
Let us break that down for a moment. What does European early Neolithic ancestry mean in plain English?
It refers to the genetic signature of early farming populations that originally migrated into Europe from Anatolia thousands of years prior. This specific mixture is crucial to historians because it deeply differentiates the Sintashta from earlier, purely local steppe populations.
Can you give an example?
Sure, for instance, the famous Yamnaya culture, which lived on the steppe centuries earlier, almost entirely lacked this European early Neolithic farming component.
So the presence of that farming DNA proves they have roots further west in Europe. And the data gets even more specific when we look at the paternal lineages, right, the Y chromosomes.
The paternal data is incredibly uniform and telling. The Y chromosome is passed directly from father to son. When geneticists analyzed the Sintashta males, they found they overwhelmingly carried a very specific Y chromosome haplogroup known as R1aZ93.
What does that specific haplogroup tell us about their society?
It confirms the archaeological theory that the Sintashta culture was heavily influenced by a specific eastward migration. The R1aZ93 lineage links them directly back to the corded ware-related peoples from the forest steppe zones of Eastern Europe, the Abashevo ancestors we discussed at the beginning.
So the migrants really did leave a mark.
They did. These migrants moved east, integrated with the local steppe populations like the Poltavka, and established a distinct genetic bottleneck.
A genetic bottleneck means that a relatively small group of men ended up fathering the vast majority of the subsequent generations, right?
Exactly. Essentially, a specific technologically advanced group of men from the West moved into the Urals, utilized their metallurgical skills and eventual chariot technology to establish absolute dominance in this new, highly stratified society, and passed their specific Y chromosome down through the elite ranks for generations.
Tracing the legacy of that specific genetic marker, along with the chariot and the bronze, allows us to track what happened next. They did not stay in the Ural Mountains forever.
No, they did not.
Yeah.
The Southern Urals acted as a localized pressure cooker. The harsh climate forced them to adapt, to invent, and to organize.
And then what?
Once they perfected industrial metallurgy and the devastating military technology of the chariot, the Sintashta culture began a massive demographic expansion between 2000 and 1800 BCE.
They evolved into something much larger, right?
Yes, they evolved into what archaeologists broadly classify as the Andronovo cultural horizon. As the climate pressure shifted, or as the population grew too large for the local river valleys, they expanded outward, moving south and east across Central Asia.
And as they moved, they took everything with them. They took their advanced arsenical and tin bronze metallurgy, their heavily refined chariot technology, their Proto-Indo-Iranian language with its deities like Apamnapat, and their specific R1aZ93 genetics. The sources state that this expansion eventually laid the foundational roots for the Vedic civilizations of ancient India and the Avestan civilizations of the Iranian plateau.
It is one of the most consequential demographic expansions in human history. They fundamentally altered the cultural, linguistic, and genetic makeup of a massive portion of the Asian continent.
I have to ask a difficult question here. To what extent was this massive continental expansion a peaceful migration versus a violent, bloody conquest? When a highly militarized group, armed with the ancient equivalent of a tank and heavy bronze armor, expands across a continent, it is very easy to assume they simply slaughtered everyone in their path.
That exact question is the subject of intense ongoing debate among modern scholars. The evidence is complex and sometimes contradictory.
What is the argument for a more peaceful or at least less violently destructive migration?
Those arguing against a purely violent genocidal conquest point directly to the skeletal evidence in the Sintashta and early Andronovo graves. Skeletal trauma, meaning bones showing clear signs of being cut by swords or crushed by axes, is actually quite low.
Really? How low?
Under 5% of the recovered skeletons show signs of violent, fatal injury. If they were engaged in constant, brutal, hand-to-hand wars of annihilation, we would expect to see mass graves filled with hacked-up skeletons. We do not see that.
But on the other hand, everything else about their culture screams military dominance.
Exactly. We cannot ignore the broader material context. We have a society that built heavily fortified towns explicitly designed to withstand sieges. We see a massive, unprecedented proliferation of specialized lethal weaponry buried in their graves. We see the rapid, wide-scale adoption of the war chariot across vast territories. And crucially, we see genetic data showing a strict paternal bottleneck.
Which implies violence, or at least dominance.
Right, which historically implies that incoming males outcompeted or forcibly replaced local males in the reproductive pool. So how do we reconcile the lack of skeletal trauma with the obvious military hardware and genetic dominance?
The most likely scenario is one of coercive military dominance rather than total war. The combination of these factors strongly suggests they expanded through overwhelming intimidation and asymmetrical power.
They just scared everyone into submission.
Pretty much. They may not have needed to engage in constant pitched battles resulting in mass casualties. When a highly organized force arrives in your territory with thundering horse-drawn chariots and heavy bronze weaponry technologies you have never seen before, resistance is often futile.
Surrender is the only option.
Exactly. Their severe technological and military superiority likely allowed them to subjugate, command, tribute from, or assimilate surrounding populations through the mere threat of overwhelming force. They established themselves as the new ruling elite across Central and South Asia, not necessarily by killing everyone, but by ensuring no one could stand against them. We have covered an immense amount of ground today, and the through line is incredibly clear. The Sintashta culture was a society fundamentally forged by an environmental crisis. When the climate dried up and the world turned hostile, they did not scatter and fade into history. They concentrated. They adapted.
They certainly did.
They built heavily fortified, densely packed towns. They developed industrial-scale metallurgy that merged their daily labor with their cosmology. They engaged in massive, long-distance continental trade to secure vital resources. And perhaps most importantly, they invented the spoked-wheel chariot to protect their wealth and project unimaginable military power.
They truly represent a pivotal hinge point in Bronze Age history. Their radical adaptations to severe environmental pressure fundamentally transformed the technological and cultural landscape of Eurasia. They set in motion massive demographic and technological shifts that still reverberate through the languages, the religions, and the genetics of billions of people alive today.
You have to wonder, when that first Sintashta carpenter figured out how to bend steamed wood to invent the spoked wheel, simply trying to build a vehicle to navigate the local battlefields of the Bronze Age steppe, did they have any idea they were actually building the vehicle that would transport their language, their gods, and their genes across the entirety of Eurasia, fundamentally rewiring human history in the process? Thank you for listening. History Maps. Learn history visually.